Sarah Mitchell had lived with her deception for 4 long years, telling herself it was necessary, that it protected Annie's future, that the truth about Jake Morrison would only complicate their already difficult lives. But when Duke entered the courtroom and immediately recognized Annie as his deceased partner's daughter, Sarah realized that some truths are too powerful to remain buried forever. The DNA test results would soon confirm that Marcus Webb was not Annie's biological father, but Duke had already provided more compelling evidence through his extraordinary behavior. Police dogs don't lie, don't deceive, don't mistake genetic connections. When Duke positioned himself protectively beside Annie and refused to move, he was making a statement that would change everything. "My real daddy was a hero like you," Annie would soon tell Duke, her innocent words revealing knowledge that should have been impossible for a child who had never been told about Jake Morrison. But somehow, in the way that children sometimes know things that adults cannot explain, Annie understood that her true family wasn't the man angrily demanding paternity rights across the courtroom. It was the loyal German shepherd whose heart had been searching for her since the night her father died, protecting others. The Tuesday morning sky hung heavy and gray over the Riverside County Courthouse, its imposing concrete facade casting long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. Inside, the sterile fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune, illuminating polished marble floors that reflected the anxiety of everyone who walked across them. The air carried the familiar scent of industrial cleaning supplies, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from the security desk, where guards prepared for another day of human drama unfolding within these walls. Sarah Mitchell sat rigidly on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom 3B, her trembling fingers smoothing the wrinkles from her navy blue dress for the 10th time. The fabric felt foreign against her skin. She'd bought it specifically for today, hoping to look respectable, responsible, like the kind of mother who deserved financial support for her child. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her purse, but each time she checked it, her heart sank a little deeper. Still no message from her lawyer, Linda Chen, who should have been here 20 minutes ago. Stay calm, Sarah told herself, drawing in a shaky breath. Everything will be fine. Marcus will be proven as Annie's father. He'll pay the child support he owes, and we can finally have some financial stability. But even as she repeated this mantra, her conscience twisted like a knife in her chest. Across the hallway, Marcus Webb lounged in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. At 28, he possessed the kind of easy charm that had initially attracted Sarah during that confusing period when she and Jake had briefly separated. His expensive charcoal suit, clearly purchased for this occasion, fit his lean frame perfectly, and his perfectly styled brown hair caught the overhead lights as he leaned toward his attorney, whispering with the smugness of someone who believed he held all the cards. "Don't worry about this, Marcus," his lawyer Richard Stone was saying in a voice that carried just enough for Sarah to overhear. "The DNA test will confirm what we already know. You'll pay whatever minimal child support the court orders, but at least you'll finally have legal rights to see your daughter." Your daughter. The words made Sarah's stomach lurch. Annie wasn't Marcus's daughter, and deep in her heart, Sarah knew this charade would crumble eventually. But she'd been living this lie for so long that facing the truth felt impossible. "Mommy, why does that man keep looking at us?" Annie's sweet voice pierced through Sarah's spiraling thoughts. Her 4-year-old daughter sat beside her on the bench, small legs swinging freely, unable to reach the floor. Annie's golden curls caught the light like spun sunshine, framing a face that held such innocent curiosity about the world around her. In her tiny arms, she clutched Mr. Bear, a threadbare teddy bear that had been her constant companion since she was barely walking. He's someone we need to talk to today, sweetheart," Sarah managed, her voice catching slightly. How could she explain to her precious daughter that this was all a terrible lie? That the man across the hall wasn't her father, but that her real father, her hero father, had died before she was even born. Jake. His name whispered through her mind like a prayer and a curse simultaneously. Officer Jake Morrison, with his gentle gray eyes and unwavering sense of justice. The man who had loved her completely, who had been so excited about their baby, who had planned to propose the moment Annie was born. Jake, who had died in a drug bust gone wrong when Sarah was 7 months pregnant, leaving her alone and terrified with mounting medical bills and no family support. The memory of that awful night still haunted her dreams. She'd been home, organizing the nursery they'd painted pale yellow because they'd wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender, when the doorbell rang at 2:17 a.m. 2 officers stood on her doorstep with their hats in their hands and devastation in their eyes. "Ma'am, we regret to inform you that Officer Morrison was killed in the line of duty." Everything after that had been a blur of grief, funeral arrangements, and the crushing realization that she would be raising their child alone. Jake's life insurance policy existed, but the paperwork was complicated, tied up in bureaucratic red tape that seemed insurmountable to a grieving, pregnant woman. The police department had been supportive, but overwhelmed with their own grief. Jake had been beloved by his fellow officers, and his death had shaken everyone. In her desperation, when Marcus had unexpectedly reached out to her a few weeks after the funeral, Sarah had made the decision that would haunt her for the next 4 years. Marcus had been persistent during their brief relationship, claiming he'd never gotten over her. When he'd suggested that maybe they could work things out, Sarah had seen an opportunity, a terrible, desperate opportunity. She'd told him she was pregnant with his child. The lie had seemed almost reasonable at the time. She and Marcus had dated for 3 months, during her and Jake's separation. The timing was close enough to be believable. Marcus had initially panicked, then reluctantly accepted responsibility when faced with the alternative of a lengthy court battle. He'd never been particularly interested in being a father, but he'd also never been one to completely shirk responsibility when cornered. Now, 4 years later, that lie had grown into this moment, this courtroom, this DNA test that would either secure Annie's financial future or destroy the only stability Sarah had been able to provide. "Mommy, you're squeezing too tight," Annie said softly, and Sarah realized she'd been gripping her daughter's small hand too firmly. "Sorry, baby," Sarah whispered, forcing herself to relax. She studied Annie's face, searching for traces of Jake in her daughter's features. The stubborn set of her jaw when she was determined about something, that was pure Jake Morrison. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking hard. The fearless way she approached new situations. Her instinctive protectiveness of smaller children at daycare. All Jake. If Marcus was proven not to be Annie's father today, they would lose the modest child support payments that barely covered daycare costs. But more than that, Annie would lose the legal protection of having an acknowledged father. Sarah's own parents had disowned her when she'd gotten pregnant unmarried, and she had no siblings. It would just be her and Annie against the world, with even less financial security than they had now. But if the DNA test somehow supported their lie, which was impossible, Sarah knew, Marcus would gain legal parental rights. He could demand visitation, could have a say in Annie's upbringing, could disrupt their lives whenever he chose. The man who had never sent a birthday card without being reminded, who showed up for his scheduled visits with Annie only about half the time, would become a permanent fixture in their lives. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling trapped between 2 impossible outcomes. In her heart, she knew what she should do: tell the truth about Jake, fight for his death benefits, raise Annie with the knowledge of her father's heroism. But the fear of financial ruin, of bureaucratic battles she couldn't afford to fight, of failing to provide for her daughter, kept her frozen in this web of deception, snapping Sarah back to the present moment. This was it. In a few minutes, the truth would begin to unravel, one way or another. The soft click of claws against polished marble announced Duke's arrival before he even came into view. Officer Maria Santos guided him through the courthouse's main entrance, their practiced partnership evident in the synchronized rhythm of their steps. Duke moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, his powerful frame carrying him with quiet dignity through the bustling morning crowds of lawyers, defendants, and court staff beginning their day. At 7 years old, Duke was a magnificent specimen of German Shepherd excellence. His coat was a rich tapestry of black and tan, with touches of distinguished gray threading through his muzzle and the tips of his ears. Silver medals earned through years of dedicated service. His intelligent brown eyes held depths that seemed almost human in their understanding, constantly scanning his environment with the trained awareness of a professional who had learned to read danger in the smallest details. "Good morning, Duke," called out Janet, the security supervisor, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile as they approached the metal detectors. Looking handsome as always, Duke's tail gave a single polite wag of acknowledgement. His training had taught him to remain focused during work hours, but his natural warmth couldn't help but shine through in these small moments of connection. He'd been coming to this courthouse for over 2 years now, and the staff had grown to love his steady, calming presence during what were often the most traumatic days of people's lives. "He's been restless all morning," Maria confided to Janet as they bypassed the metal detectors. Duke's official K9 credentials granted them passage. "Pacing in his kennel, whining at nothing I could see. It's like he's searching for something." Maria Santos had been Duke's handler for 3 years now, ever since his original partner had died. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor that had made her perfect for Duke's specialized courthouse assignment. Unlike his previous work in active police operations, Duke's current role focused on providing emotional support during difficult testimonies and helping traumatized witnesses feel safe enough to tell their stories. "Maybe it's the weather," Janet suggested, glancing toward the gray windows. "Dogs can sense pressure changes before storms hit," but Maria shook her head slightly. Duke's restlessness wasn't weather-related. She'd learned to read his moods over their years together. This was something deeper, something that had been building for months now. He'd started displaying unusual behavior during their off-duty time, scanning crowds at the grocery store, pulling toward strangers on their evening toward courtroom 3B, where Duke was scheduled to provide support during a family court session. Judge Patricia Wells had specifically requested his presence, knowing that custody cases could be particularly emotional and that Duke's calming influence might be needed. Duke's routine in courtrooms had become second nature over the years. Upon entering, he would perform a careful survey of the room, assessing the emotional temperature of the occupants, identifying potential stress points, and selecting the optimal position to provide maximum comfort while remaining unobtrusive. His training had taught him to read body language, tone of voice, and even scent markers that indicated distress, fear, or anger. Today, however, something felt different from the moment they stepped into the courthouse. Duke's nostrils flared subtly as he processed the complex bouquet of human emotions that permeated the building. Anxiety, fear, anger, hope, all the usual suspects were present. But underneath it all was something else, something that made his heart rate increase and his senses sharpen with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. "Easy, boy," Maria murmured, feeling the tension in his leash as they approached the courtroom. "Just another day at the office." But Duke knew this wasn't just another day. Every instinct he possessed was telling him that something significant was about to happen, though he couldn't identify what or why. The feeling reminded him of his early days with Jake, when they'd approach a potentially dangerous situation and Jake would tense up, his own instincts picking up on dangers that weren't yet visible. Duke had learned to trust those moments, to heighten his own alertness when his partner's breathing changed or his grip on the leash tightened almost imperceptibly. Jake. Even now, 3 years after that terrible night, the memory of his first partner could still make Duke's chest tighten with grief. Jake Morrison had been more than a handler. He'd been Duke's best friend, his family, his entire world. They'd shared everything: morning runs, late-night stakeouts, dangerous raids, and quiet moments in the patrol car when Jake would tell Duke about his dreams for the future. "You're going to love being around kids, Duke," Jake had said during one of their last conversations, his hand resting gently on Duke's head as they sat in the car after a domestic violence call. "Sarah's going to have our baby soon, and I can't wait for you to meet them. You'll be like a big brother, protecting our little family." Duke had understood the excitement in Jake's voice, the way his scent changed when he talked about Sarah and the coming baby. He'd been looking forward to meeting this new addition to their pack, to having a small human to watch over and protect. Then came that partner as Jake's life ebbed away, whispering Duke's name one final time before the silence took him. The aftermath had been a blur of grief and confusion. Duke had refused food for days, sitting vigil by Jake's empty locker at the police station, waiting for a return that would never come. The other officers had tried to comfort him, but nothing could fill the Jake-shaped hole in his heart. Maria had been patient during their early partnership, understanding that Duke needed time to heal, to learn that accepting her partnership didn't mean betraying Jake's memory. Gradually, Duke had begun to engage again, to find purpose in his new role, helping traumatized witnesses and providing comfort to families in crisis. But he'd never stopped searching. In quiet moments, when his professional duties didn't require his full attention, Duke would scan faces in the courthouse corridors, sniff the air for familiar scents, hoping against hope that somehow, somewhere, a piece of Jake still existed in the world. The other officers had noticed his behavior. "It's like he's looking for someone," Officer Rodriguez had commented just last week. "He gets this look in his eyes sometimes, like he's expecting Jake to walk around the corner." Maria had taken Duke to Jake's gravesite twice, hoping it might provide some closure. Duke had lain on the grass beside the headstone for hours, his chin resting on his paws, eyes scanning the horizon. But instead of providing peace, the visits seemed to intensify his searching behavior. It was as if being there reminded him that Jake had left something unfinished, something important that Duke was meant to find. "All right, boy," Maria said softly as they reached the door of courtroom 3B. "Let's go do what we do best." She pushed open the heavy wooden door, and Duke stepped into the familiar environment of polished wood, fluorescent lighting, and the complex emotional atmosphere of human conflict resolution. His trained eyes began their automatic survey of the room, cataloging the positions of the various participants, assessing their stress levels, determining where his presence might be most beneficial. But today, something in the air made him stop mid-stride. The moment Duke's paws crossed the threshold of courtroom 3B, the world shifted. It was as if someone had suddenly turned up the volume on every sense he possessed. The familiar sounds of shuffling papers and muted conversations faded into background noise, replaced by the thunderous beating of his own heart and a rushing sensation that made his ears perk forward with laser focus. Then he saw her, a small figure with golden curls, sitting on the plaintiff's bench beside a dark-haired woman. The child was swinging her, but this wasn't the focused tension of danger. This was something else entirely. Something that made his breath catch and his heart race with a recognition he couldn't quite name. His ears snapped to full attention, rotating like radar dishes, trying to capture every sound from the direction of that small, golden-haired child. A soft whine escaped his throat, low and questioning, causing Maria to glance down at him with surprise. In all their years together, she'd never heard him make that particular sound. It was vulnerable, almost hopeful, nothing like his usual professional composure. "Duke," she whispered, concerned by his sudden change in behavior. "What is it, boy?" But Duke couldn't hear her. Every fiber of his being was focused on the little girl, his powerful sense of smell working overtime to process the complex bouquet of scents emanating from her direction. And there, woven through the typical scents of childhood, bubblegum shampoo, playground dirt, the worn cotton of her teddy bear, was something that made his entire world stop spinning. Familiar, so familiar. The scent signature was faint but unmistakable, like finding a melody from a half-remembered song. It carried undertones that his heart recognized, even if his mind couldn't immediately place them. Warmth, gentleness, protectiveness, and something indefinably masculine that spoke to memories of morning runs and shared patrol car lunches and quiet conversations in the dark. Jake. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This child carried scent markers that resonated with his deepest memories of his first partner. Not the exact same scent. That was impossible. But something genetically related. Something that spoke of shared blood and inherited characteristics that only a dog's incredible olfactory system could detect. Meanwhile, Annie Morrison, though she didn't know her real last name, had noticed the pretty doggie the moment he entered the room. Her 4-year-old eyes lit up with the pure joy that children reserve for animals, and she tugged on her mother's sleeve with excitement. "Mommy, look, there's a doggie in here," she whispered with the kind of stage whisper that carries across entire rooms. "He's so pretty. Can I pet him, please?" Sarah's reaction was immediate and sharp. "No, Annie, absolutely not." Her voice carried an edge of panic that made several nearby people turn to look. "That's a working dog. We can't disturb him." But Annie wasn't easily discouraged. She'd inherited her real father's fearless nature and natural affinity for animals, though Sarah tried not to think about those similarities too often. "But Mommy, he's looking right at me. I think he wants to be..." Participants maintain his usual calm demeanor, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from this child, who somehow carried echoes of the most important person in his life. "Is that dog okay?" asked Mrs. Patterson, an elderly court reporter who'd been working in this building for over 20 years. "He seems different today." Bailiff Tom Morrison, no relation to Jake despite the shared surname, was also watching Duke with growing concern. He'd worked with the K-9 unit for years and had never seen Duke behave this way. "Yeah, he's usually much calmer. Duke's normally the most professional dog we've got," Judge Patricia Wells, who was reviewing case files at her bench, glanced up at the unusual commotion. In her 15 years on the family court bench, she'd worked with Duke on dozens of cases. He was legendary among the courthouse staff for his ability to remain calm and supportive during even the most emotionally charged situations. She'd specifically requested his presence today because custody cases involving young children could be particularly traumatic, and Duke's calming influence was often exactly what was needed. But the dog she was looking at now bore little resemblance to the composed professional she knew. Duke's entire body language had changed. He was alert, focused, almost protective in a way that seemed directed specifically at the small blonde child on the plaintiff's side. "Officer Santos," Judge Wells called softly. "Is Duke all right? He seems unusually engaged today." Maria looked down at her partner, genuinely puzzled by his behavior. Duke was practically vibrating with energy, his intelligent eyes fixed on Annie with an intensity that was both beautiful and concerning. "I'm not sure, Your Honor. He's been restless all morning, but nothing like this." As the adults discussed his unusual behavior, Duke made a decision that went against every bit of his professional training. Instead of finding his usual spot at the back of the courtroom where he could observe without being intrusive, he began moving purposefully toward the plaintiff's bench. Each step was deliberate, careful, as if he was approaching something precious that might flee if he moved too quickly. "Duke, heel," Maria commanded softly, but for the first time in their partnership, Duke didn't immediately obey. He continued his slow approach, his eyes never leaving Annie's face. Annie, meanwhile, was practically bouncing with excitement. "Mommy, he's coming over here. He wants to meet me." "Annie, sit still," Sarah hissed, her anxiety reaching fever pitch. Something about Duke's focused attention on her daughter was making her deeply uncomfortable, though she couldn't articulate why. It felt like he was seeing through all her carefully constructed lies, as if those intelligent brown eyes could somehow detect the secret she'd been carrying for 4 years. Duke stopped just outside the rail that separated the gallery from the main court area, perfectly still, except for the slight tremor of excitement that ran through him. He was close enough now that Annie's scent completely filled his awareness, and with it came a flood of memories so vivid they nearly overwhelmed him. Jake's laugh when Sarah told him she was pregnant, the way his partner's face had lit up with pure joy. "A baby, Duke! We're going to have a baby!" Jake's hands as he gestured excitedly, talking about nurseries and baby names and all the things he wanted to teach his child. "I can't wait to introduce you two. You're going to be the best big brother." The sense of Jake's happiness during those final weeks, the way he'd started carrying a small ultrasound photo in his wallet, the plans he'd made for their future as a family. This child, this beautiful, fearless little girl with Jake's stubborn jawline and his bright, curious eyes, was the baby Jake had been so excited to meet. Duke was as certain of this as he'd ever been certain of anything in his life. Every instinct he possessed, every bit of training and experience, every fiber of his being was telling him that he was looking at Jake Morrison's daughter, his partner's child, his family. A profound sense of purpose settled over Duke, stronger than any training or professional directive he'd ever received. This wasn't just any child who might need comfort during a difficult court proceeding. This was Jake's daughter, the baby his partner had died before meeting, the family he'd promised to protect. Duke positioned himself carefully, angling his body so that he could see both Annie and the man across the aisle, who kept making aggressive gestures and speaking in raised tones. Something about that man's scent and demeanor triggered Duke's protective instincts in a way that had nothing to do with professional training and everything to do with the primal need to guard his pack. "Wow," whispered Annie, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy, I think he's trying to protect me." Sarah's blood ran cold at her daughter's innocent observation, because looking at Duke's positioning, at the alert set of his ears and the careful way he was watching both Annie and Marcus, that's exactly what it looked like. And somehow, impossibly, Annie seemed to understand. "It's okay, pretty doggy," she whispered, just loud enough for Duke to hear. "I'm not scared. You have kind eyes just like my daddy should have." The words hit Duke like a physical blow. Kind eyes, just like my daddy should have. Not just like my daddy has, or just like my daddy did, but should have, as if she knew somewhere in her innocent heart that her real father was someone other than the angry man across the aisle. Duke's tail, which had been motionless since entering the courtroom, gave a single soft wag. It was barely perceptible, but in the tense atmosphere of the courtroom, even that small gesture felt monumentally significant. Judge Wells leaned forward, seen before her. In 30 years of legal practice, she had never witnessed anything quite like this. The connection between Duke and the child was palpable, electric, as if they were communicating on a level that transcended the usual barriers between human and animal. "Well," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else, "I have the distinct feeling that this case is about to become much more interesting than anyone anticipated." As if responding to her words, the court clerk entered with a sealed envelope in her hands, the DNA results that would either confirm or shatter the web of lies that had brought them all here today. But Duke already knew what those results would say. He could smell the truth in the air, could see it in Annie's face, could feel it in the way his heart had recognized her the moment she came into view. This was Jake's daughter, his partner's child, the family he'd been searching for without even knowing it. And he would protect her with his life, just as he would have protected Jake. The pieces of a 4-year-old puzzle were finally beginning to fall into place, and Duke positioned himself like a guardian angel, ready for whatever revelations were about to unfold. The first rays of dawn painted the horizon in shades of amber and rose as Officer Jake Morrison's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. sharp. But Jake was already awake, had been for the past 10 minutes, lying in bed with his hand resting gently on Sarah's rounded belly, feeling their baby's morning stretches through her thin nightgown. At 7 months pregnant, Sarah glowed with that ethereal beauty that made Jake fall in love with her all over again each morning. "Good morning, little one," he whispered to her belly, his voice soft with wonder. "Daddy's got to go to work, but I'll be thinking about you all day." Duke, who had been lying at the foot of the bed in perfect stillness, lifted his magnificent head at the sound of Jake's voice. Their morning routine was as precisely choreographed as a ballet. Duke would stretch, yawn once, and then pad silently to the kitchen while Jake showered, knowing that breakfast would be ready in exactly 15 minutes. Jake Morrison at 28 was everything a police officer should be: strong, compassionate, intelligent, and driven by an unwavering desire to protect and serve. His sandy brown hair caught the morning light as he moved through their small apartment with quiet efficiency, careful not to wake Sarah, who needed every moment of rest she could get in these final weeks of pregnancy. "Come on, partner," Jake said softly to Duke, who was already waiting by his food bowl with the patience of a saint. "Let's fuel up for another day of keeping the world safe." Together, like two parts of the same organism, each anticipating the other's needs and reactions with supernatural precision. "You know what, Duke?" Jake said as he measured out the carefully calculated portions of Duke's specialized food. "I've been thinking about making detective. Sarah and the baby are going to need the security that comes with the promotion. Better hours, better pay, less dangerous situations. He scratched behind Duke's ears as the dog ate. What do you think, boy? Ready to trade street patrol for investigative work? Duke paused in his eating to look up at Jake with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand every word. The German shepherd had an uncanny ability to read Jake's moods, to sense when his partner was excited, worried, or lost in thought. This morning, Jake radiated contentment and hope, the emotional scent of a man who had everything he'd ever wanted within his grasp. Their patrol car was already warming up when they arrived at the station, steam rising from its hood in the cool morning air. Jake's fellow officers had grown accustomed to seeing him arrive each day with a spring in his step and a constant smile. Morrison's got baby fever, they'd joke, but it was said with affection and perhaps a touch of envy for a man who'd found such perfect happiness. "Hey, Jake," called out Officer Rodriguez as they passed the locker room. "Sarah feeling okay? Baby giving her trouble sleeping?" "She's perfect," Jake replied, unable to hide the pride in his voice. "Doctor says everything's progressing beautifully. 2 more months, and we'll be parents." He paused, grinning. "Well, I'll be a parent. Duke here's already practicing being a big brother." It was true. Duke had begun displaying protective behavior around Sarah that amazed everyone who witnessed it. He would position himself between her and stairs, walk more slowly when she was with them, and had even started sleeping on the floor beside their bed instead of his usual spot at the foot. It was as if he understood that Sarah carried something precious that needed extra protection. Their patrol routes took them through the neighborhoods Jake had grown up in, streets where he'd learned to ride a bike, played pickup basketball, and first decided he wanted to be a police officer. He knew every shopkeeper by name, remembered which corners the teenagers liked to gather on, could predict where trouble might brew before it happened. "You see that, Duke?" Jake would say during their quieter moments, pointing out a group of kids playing in a park or an elderly couple walking hand in hand. "That's what we're protecting. Not just the laws or the property, but the idea that families can feel safe, that kids can play without fear, that people like Sarah and our baby can build a life without constantly looking over." During patrol were Jake's way of thinking out loud, and Duke had become his most trusted confidant. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. "Domestic violence complaint at 1247 Maple Street," an address Jake recognized from previous calls. The Hendersons were regulars in their patrol area, a volatile couple whose arguments periodically spilled into violence, requiring police intervention. "Unit 47 responding," Jake radioed, his voice professional despite the familiar tightness in his chest. Domestic calls were unpredictable, dangerous in ways that routine traffic stops never were, but they were also the calls where police work mattered most, where the difference between life and death often came down to how quickly officers could de-escalate a situation. "Stay sharp, partner," Jake murmured to Duke as they pulled up to the modest 2-story house. Every light was on, and they could hear shouting even from the street. "Something feels different about this one." Duke's body language confirmed Jake's instincts. The dog's ears were forward, his muscles tense with anticipation. In their 3 years together, Duke had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it manifested, and right now every line of his body was screaming caution. They approached the house using their standard protocol, Jake taking the lead, Duke positioned to provide backup and protection. The front door was slightly ajar, which immediately raised Jake's alarm level. In all their previous visits to this address, The Hendersons had always kept their domestic disputes behind closed doors. The first gunshot shattered the night air before they reached the porch. Jake's training took over instantly, his body moving with the fluid precision of hundreds of hours of practice. "Shots fired, officer needs assistance," he radioed while simultaneously drawing his weapon and signaling Duke to take cover position. But this wasn't a domestic dispute gone wrong. It was an ambush. The second and third shots came from the shadows beside the house, catching Jake in the chest and shoulder. As he tried to reach cover, he went down hard, his weapon skittering across the concrete walkway, his radio crackling with dispatch trying to confirm his location. Duke's response was immediate and ferocious. The loyal German shepherd launched himself toward the source of the gunfire, a protective fury unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. But more shots rang out, and Jake heard Duke's yelp of pain as a bullet caught the dog in the leg. "Duke, down! Stay down!" Jake managed to shout, even as his own vision began to blur from blood loss. His training told him to seek cover, to wait for backup, to preserve his own life so he could continue to serve and protect. But his heart told him to get to Duke, to make sure his partner was safe. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was coming, but Jake could feel his strength ebb. Metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, and he knew with the clarity that sometimes comes in life's final moments that he wasn't going to make it home to Sarah and their baby. "Duke," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the approaching sirens. "Come here, boy." Despite his own wound, Duke crawled across the concrete to reach Jake's side, pressing his warm body against his partner's chest. Jake's hand found Duke's head, fingers tangling in the familiar fur he'd petted 1,000 times. "Good boy," Jake breathed, his eyes focusing on Duke's loyal face with tremendous effort. "You're such a good boy. I need you to do something for me, okay? I need you to find them, Sarah and the baby. When they're born, find them, protect them like you protected me." Duke whined softly, nuzzling against Jake's neck as if trying to share his warmth, his strength, his very life force. "Promise me," Jake whispered, his hand tightening slightly in Duke's fur. "Promise me you'll find my family." Duke's brown eyes never left Jake's face as the light began to fade from them. He stayed perfectly still, sharing his partner's final breaths, until the paramedics gently pulled him away from the man who had been his entire world. In the days that followed, Duke's grief was inconsolable. He refused food, ignored commands, and spent hours sitting vigil beside Jake's patrol car in the station parking lot. The other officers tried everything: treats, walks, even bringing in specialists who dealt with traumatized K-9 units. But Duke seemed determined to waste away, as if living without Jake was simply too painful to bear. It was only the memory of Jake's final request that kept Duke going, that whispered promise to find and protect Sarah and the baby. Even in his deepest grief, Duke held on to that mission, that purpose that Jake had given him with his dying breath. Somewhere out there was Jake's family, and someday, somehow, Duke would find them. Sarah Mitchell was folding tiny baby clothes when the doorbell rang at 2:17 a.m., each delicate onesie a testament to the hope and joy she and Jake had been building together. Her 7-month pregnant belly made getting up from the nursery floor a production, and she paused for a moment to catch her breath, one hand pressed against her lower back, where the ache had been building all evening. Who could that be at this hour? She murmured to herself, though something deep in her stomach already knew. Police officers' families learn to recognize the sound of tragedy. It arrives with solemn footsteps and voices too carefully controlled. The hallway seemed impossibly long as she made her way to the front door, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors Jake had refinished himself just last Mitchell? I'm Sergeant Williams. This is Officer Chen. We regret to inform you that Officer Jake Morrison was killed in the line of duty tonight. We're so very sorry for your loss. The words seemed to come from very far away, filtered through water or cotton, or the strange buzzing that had suddenly filled her ears. Sarah's knees buckled, and if not for Officer Chen's quick reflexes, she would have collapsed right there on the threshold. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "No, that's not. He just left for work this morning. He kissed my belly goodbye. He said he'd bring home Chinese food for dinner. He's working late, that's all. He's just working late." But even as she spoke, Sarah knew it was true. The careful compassion in their voices, the way Sergeant Williams couldn't quite meet her eyes, the profound silence that seemed to have settled over her normally bustling neighborhood, everything confirmed what her heart already understood. Jake was gone. The funeral was a blur of dress blues and folded flags, of Jake's fellow officers telling stories about his courage and dedication, of condolences from people whose faces Sarah couldn't seem to focus on through her grief. Duke was there, limping from his own wound, lying beside Jake's casket with a dignity that broke everyone's heart. The dog seemed to understand the finality of the ceremony in a way that made Sarah's own denial feel childish. "What am I going to do?" she asked her sister Linda during the reception at the police station. "I'm 7 months pregnant. I have no money saved, no family support, no idea how to do this alone." Linda, who had flown in from Seattle for the funeral, could offer only platitudes. "You're strong, Sarah. You'll figure it out. Jake would want you to be strong for the baby." But strength didn't pay medical bills or rent. Strength didn't explain to insurance companies why their complicated policy procedures seemed designed to prevent rather than facilitate payments to grieving beneficiaries. Strength didn't magically create the support network Sarah needed to raise a child as a single mother. The insurance paperwork alone was overwhelming. Jake's life insurance policy existed, but accessing it required navigating a bureaucratic maze that seemed designed to discourage claims. Death certificates, employment verification, beneficiary documentation. Each step required forms that led to more forms, offices that were only open during hours when Sarah was too exhausted to function, phone calls that ended in automated systems that transferred her endlessly without resolution. It could take 6 months to a year to process everything, the insurance representative explained with practiced sympathy. These cases involving line-of-duty deaths require additional verification, and with your pregnancy, we need to ensure proper documentation for any potential dependents. 6 months to a year. Sarah's baby wouldn't last another month, let alone long enough to navigate the insurance company's bureaucratic labyrinth. That's when Marcus Webb reappeared in her life. Sarah had dated Marcus briefly during a period when she and Jake had separated, a stupid fight about commitment that had lasted 3 miserable weeks before they realized they couldn't live without each other. Marcus was charming in a surface-level way, the kind of man who looked good on paper but lacked the depth and integrity that had drawn Sarah to Jake in the first place. "I heard about Jake," Marcus said when he called a week after the funeral, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine concern. "I know we didn't end things on the best terms, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Sarah, exhausted from sleepless nights and overwhelmed by the mountain of problems facing her, found herself grateful for any human connection that didn't involve condolences or paperwork. Marcus listened as she poured out her fears about money, about raising a baby alone, about the uncertainty of everything she'd thought was secure in her life. "I could help," Marcus offered during their third phone conversation. "I mean, if you wanted. I know it's complicated, but I never really got over you, Sarah. Maybe this is a chance for us to, I don't know, try again." The suggestion was absurd, and Sarah knew it. She was carrying another man's child, grieving the love of her life, facing financial ruin. The idea of starting a romantic relationship with Marcus under these circumstances was almost insulting to Jake's memory. But as the weeks passed and Sarah's situation grew more desperate, Marcus's offer began to seem less like charity and more like salvation. "What if," Sarah found herself saying during a particularly dark moment at 3 a.m., when the medical bills seemed insurmountable. "What if people thought you were the father?" The lie formed slowly, growing from desperate hope into calculated deception. Marcus had been in her life during the right time frame. The dates could work if no one looked too closely. And if Marcus was legally recognized as the father, he would be responsible for child support, not much, but enough to keep Sarah and the baby from complete destitution. "I don't know," Marcus had said initially. "That's a pretty big lie, Sarah." What if someone finds out that Sarah could hear the calculation in his voice? Marcus had always been more concerned with appearing responsible than actually being responsible. The idea of being seen as a stand-up guy who stepped up for his child might appeal to his ego, especially if the actual financial burden was minimal. "Think about it," Sarah had pressed. "You'd be helping me and the baby, but it's not like I'd demand much, just enough for basics, and you'd have a child. Isn't that something you've always said you wanted?" Marcus's eventual agreement came with conditions that revealed his true character. He wanted legal documentation that would limit his financial exposure, wanted flexibility in his visitation schedule, wanted assurances that Sarah wouldn't pursue him for additional support beyond what the court ordered. "This is business," he'd said, as if that made the deception more palatable. "We're helping each other out." But for Sarah, it felt like selling her soul. The weight of the lies settled on her shoulders the moment she signed Annie's birth certificate, listing Marcus Webb as the father. Every night since then, she'd lain awake, staring at the ceiling, tortured by the memory of Jake's excitement about their baby, his dreams of being a father, his whispered promises to their unborn child. Annie had been born with Jake's stubborn chin and his bright, inquisitive eyes. She had his fearless nature, his instinctive kindness toward animals, his protective instincts toward smaller children. Every day, Sarah saw more of Jake in their daughter, and every day the guilt grew heavier. "Mommy, why don't I have pictures with my daddy when I was a baby?" Annie had asked just last month, her 4-year-old logic trying to make sense of a situation that made no sense. "Your daddy was busy," Sarah had lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "He couldn't be there right away." But Annie was too smart, too perceptive. She seemed to sense that something was wrong with the story of her family, that the pieces didn't fit together the way they should. She never warmed to Marcus during his infrequent visits, never called him Daddy despite his occasional encouragement to do so, never seemed comfortable in his presence. "He doesn't smell right," Annie had announced after Marcus's last visit, wrinkling her nose in the way she did when something confused her. "Daddies should smell like hugs and safety. He smells like lying." The observation had hit Sarah like a physical blow. Even at 4 years old, Annie could sense the fundamental dishonesty that had shaped her entire life. And now, sitting in this courtroom, waiting for DNA results that would expose everything, Sarah realized that her desperate decision 4 years ago hadn't protected Annie at all. It had stolen from her the truth about her real father, a hero who had died protecting others, a man who would have loved her unconditionally. a legacy of courage and integrity that she deserved to know. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer to Jake's memory. "I'm sorry. I was so scared and so alone, and I thought I was protecting her. But I should have trusted." Department assigned her as his new handler 6 weeks after Jake's death. Duke was barely a shadow of the magnificent canine officer she'd heard legendary stories about. He'd lost weight, his coat had dulled, and his eyes held an emptiness that made Maria's chest ache every time she looked at him. "He's not eating consistently," Sergeant Williams had explained during their first meeting at the station. "The vet says he's physically healthy, but mentally, he's stuck. It's like he's waiting for Jake to come back." Maria approached Duke's kennel slowly, her movements deliberately calm and non-threatening. She'd studied his file extensively, learning about his exceptional record, his specialized training, his legendary bond with Jake Morrison. But the dog she found curled in the corner of his kennel bore little resemblance to the confident, alert canine officer described in those reports. "Hey there, Duke," she said softly, settling cross-legged on the floor outside his kennel. "I'm Maria. I know you don't know me, and I know this is all wrong. I know I'm not Jake, and I'm not trying to be." Duke lifted his head slightly at the mention of Jake's name, his ears twitching with interest for the first time in weeks. But when he realized the voice didn't belong to his missing partner, his head sank back down onto his paws with a heartbreaking sigh. Maria had patience. She'd grown up in a household where animals were family members, where her grandmother had taught her that healing happened on the animal's timeline, not the human's. She sat outside Duke's kennel for an hour that first day, talking quietly about nothing important, the weather, her morning coffee, the way the afternoon light slanted through the station windows. "I lost my partner too," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not the same way, but I understand what it feels like when someone who was your whole world just isn't there anymore." Duke's eyes opened at that, focusing on her face with the first spark of real attention she'd seen from him. The partnership that eventually developed between Maria and Duke was built on mutual respect and understanding, rather than the deep emotional bond Duke had shared with Jake. Maria never tried to replicate Jake's relationship with Duke. Instead, she created space for something new, something that honored Duke's grief while giving him purpose again. "We're not replacing what you had," she would tell him during their early training sessions. "We're building something different, something that Jake would be proud of." Duke's return to duty was gradual and carefully managed. His skills had remained sharp despite his grief. His nose could still detect drugs and explosives with stunning accuracy. His protective instincts were intact, and his ability to read human emotions was as profound as ever. But Maria recognized that Duke needed a different kind of assignment than the high-stress patrol work he'd done with Jake. "Courthouse duty?" she'd suggested to the sergeant. "He's always been exceptional with children and trauma victims. Judge Wells has been asking for a therapy dog for family court cases." The courthouse assignment proved perfect for Duke's healing process. The work was meaningful without being dangerous, requiring his emotional intelligence without putting him in situations that might trigger traumatic memories of that final night with Jake. Duke seemed to understand that his role was to provide comfort to people facing some of the worst moments of their lives, and he approached this responsibility with the same dedication he'd brought to patrol work. Children especially responded to Duke's gentle presence. There was something about his calm dignity, his patient brown eyes, and his intuitive understanding of fear and sadness that made even the most traumatized young witnesses feel safe enough to tell their stories. It's like he knows exactly what each person needs, Judge Wells had observed after watching Duke work for several months. Some children need him close. Others just need to know he's there. Some adults don't even realize they're petting him until they've been talking for 10 minutes. He has a gift. But Maria had begun noticing changes in Duke's behavior over the past few months that concerned her professionally, even as they gave her hope personally. Duke had started displaying what could only be described as searching behavior, scanning faces in courthouse corridors, pulling towards strangers during their off-duty walks, showing increased alertness in crowds as if he was looking for someone specific. He's different during lunch breaks, Officer Rodriguez had mentioned last month. Yesterday I saw him spend 15 minutes just staring at the parking lot, like he expected someone to drive up. Maria had taken Duke to Jake's gravesite twice, hoping it might provide closure. The first visit had been heartbreaking. Duke had lain on the grass beside Jake's headstone for over 3 hours, occasionally whimpering softly, but mostly just watching the horizon with those intelligent eyes that seemed to be waiting for something. The second visit had been even more puzzling. Instead of the peaceful resignation Maria had hoped for, Duke had seemed energized by being there, as if Jake's presence in that place had reminded him of something important he needed to do. It's like he thinks Jake left him unfinished business, Maria had told her partner, Officer Chen, after that second cemetery visit. He gets this look in his eyes sometimes, like he's remembering a conversation or a promise, and then he starts searching again. The other canine officers had noticed it too. Duke would pause during routine building sweeps, his nose working overtime, walked through, as if he was trying to match them to some internal template. "You think he's looking for Jake?" Officer Martinez had asked during a recent briefing. "Like he doesn't understand that Jake's really gone?" But Maria didn't think Duke's behavior was about denial. Duke was too intelligent, too emotionally sophisticated, to believe Jake might walk through those courthouse doors. This was something else, something more like a mission. "I think Jake might have asked him to do something," Maria had finally said, the theory crystallizing as she spoke. Something Duke feels responsible for completing. It was the only explanation that made sense. Duke's searching wasn't random or desperate. It was methodical, purposeful, as if he was working from specific criteria that only he understood. He would show intense interest in certain people, while ignoring others entirely. Young mothers with small children particularly caught his attention, though he'd never shown any reaction that suggested he'd found what he was looking for. Until today. Maria had noticed Duke's unusual restlessness that morning, from the moment they'd arrived at the station. He'd paced in his kennel, whined softly at nothing she could identify, and kept looking toward the courthouse, with an intensity that reminded her of his patrol days, when he'd sensed danger before it became visible. "What is it, boy?" she'd asked as they'd walked toward the courthouse. "What's got you so worked up?" But Duke had just pulled more insistently toward the building, his tail held high with anticipation, for the first time in months. Whatever he'd been searching for, Maria realized, he believed he was about to find it. Now, watching Duke's extraordinary reaction to the little blonde girl in courtroom 3B, Maria felt all the puzzle pieces clicking into place. The searching behavior, the restlessness, the way Duke had seemed to be working from a specific mission that only he understood. It all made sense. If Jake had somehow communicated to Duke that there was family out there who needed protection. "Duke," she whispered, understanding dawning in her voice. "Is that what you've been looking for? Is that Jake's family?" Duke's response was a soft whine that somehow conveyed both confirmation and desperate hope. After 3 years of searching, of carrying Jake's final request in his heart, he'd finally found them. Jake Morrison's daughter was sitting 20 feet away, and Duke's long vigil was finally coming to an end. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through courtroom 3B like a gunshot, instantly silencing the nervous murmurs and rustling papers that had filled the air. Judge Patricia Wells, her silver hair pulled back in a dignified years on the bench.
"We are here today to address the matter of Webb versus Mitchell regarding paternity determination and child support obligations for the minor child, Annie Mitchell." Judge Wells's gaze swept across the courtroom, taking in the nervous energy radiating from both sides, before settling on Duke's imposing figure near the back of the room. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the presence of Duke, our courthouse therapy dog, who is here today at my request. Given that this case involves a young child and potentially sensitive testimony, Duke's calming presence may be beneficial for all parties involved." Her eyes found Annie, who was sitting between Sarah and her lawyer, swinging her legs and looking around the formal courtroom with wide-eyed curiosity. "I want everyone to understand that Duke is a highly trained professional animal who has helped numerous families through difficult proceedings. His presence here is purely for emotional support and comfort." What Judge Wells didn't mention, because she couldn't explain it herself, was the extraordinary behavior Duke had displayed from the moment he'd entered the courtroom. In all her years working with him, she'd never seen him so intensely focused on a single person, especially not a child he'd never met before. "Mr. Stone," Judge Wells continued, nodding to Marcus's attorney, "you may proceed with your opening statement." Richard Stone rose from his chair with the calculated confidence of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. Tall and impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 2 months, he commanded attention through sheer presence and practiced courtroom theatrics. "Your Honor," Stone began, his voice resonating through the room, "my client Marcus Webb stands before this court today not as a man trying to escape responsibility, but as a young man who has done his best to step up for his daughter under extraordinarily difficult circumstances." Duke's ears perked up at the word daughter, his intelligent brown eyes shifting to focus intently on Stone's face. Maria, sitting nearby, felt the subtle change in Duke's posture and placed a gentle hand on his back, trying to keep him calm. "Mr. Webb was barely 24 when he learned of Annie's existence," Stone continued, gesturing toward Annie with practiced drama. "Despite his young age and limited financial resources, he has consistently provided support for this child. Yes, Your Honor, there have been times when his payments were late or insufficient, but we're talking about a young man working entry-level jobs, trying to build a career while supporting a child he had never planned for." Marcus straightened in his chair, clearly enjoying his lawyer's portrayal of him as a reluctant hero. He shot a confident glance toward Sarah, as if to say, "See, this is going exactly as planned." But Annie, with the brutal honesty that only children possess, was studying Marcus with undisguised confusion. "Mommy," she whispered, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "Why is everyone so serious?" Sarah's face flushed crimson as she tried to quiet Annie, but Judge Wells held up a gentle hand. Stone continued his opening statement, painting Marcus as a victim of circumstances beyond his control. "Furthermore, Your Honor, my client has maintained what relationship he could with Annie, despite the geographical challenges and Mrs. Mitchell's accorded attitude regarding visitation schedules.
This characterization made Duke's muscles tense visibly. A low growl, barely audible, but unmistakably threatening, rumbled from his chest. The sound was so unexpected, so completely out of character for the usually serene therapy dog, that despite the geographical challenges, essentially a single mother, bearing the overwhelming majority of expenses related to Annie's care, education, and medical needs. Annie, who had been listening to all this adult talk about her life with growing confusion, turned to her mother with innocent curiosity. "Mommy, when can I pet the doggy? He looks sad, and I think he wants to be friends." Indeed, while Duke's hostility toward Marcus was unmistakable, his demeanor toward Annie was completely different. Every time she spoke or moved, his attention shifted to her with an almost protective watchfulness that was as puzzling as it was touching. Chen continued her statement, presenting evidence of Marcus's inconsistent support payments, his frequent cancellations of scheduled visits with Annie, and his general lack of engagement in her day-to-day life. The DNA test we're conducting today will confirm Mr. Webb's paternity, but more importantly, it will establish his legal obligation to provide adequate financial support for his daughter's future. Marcus's confidence began to waver slightly as he noticed Duke's unwavering stare. There was something unnerving about the way the dog watched him, as if Duke could see through all his carefully constructed justifications and explanations. Marcus had always been uncomfortable around animals. They seemed to sense something in him that people missed, something that made them wary and defensive. "What's wrong with that dog?" Marcus whispered to his lawyer. "Why does it keep looking at me like that?" Stone glanced at Duke dismissively. "It's just a therapy dog. Ignore it." But Duke was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. His behavior was so unusual that even Judge Wells was taking notice, her experienced eye recognizing that something extraordinary was happening in her courtroom. "Mrs. Chen," Judge Wells said as Sarah's lawyer concluded her opening statement, "before we proceed to evidence presentation, I want to address the unusual behavior we're seeing from our therapy dog today. Officer Santos, is Duke experiencing any kind of distress that might require his removal from the courtroom?" Maria looked down at Duke, whose intense focus on Annie and Marcus showed no signs of abating. "He's alert, Your Honor, but not distressed. I've never seen him react this way to specific individuals before. It's almost like he recognizes someone." "Very well," Judge Wells decided. "We'll continue with Duke present, but I want everyone to understand that his behavior today is highly unusual. If it becomes disruptive, we may need to take a recess." Annie clapped her hands together softly. "Oh, good. I really do want to meet him. He has the kindest eyes I've ever seen." Sarah felt that chill deepen. Annie had Jake's gift for seeing the best in people, and animals apparently. But there was something about the way she responded to Duke, as if she recognized something in him too. The truth was a living thing in this courtroom, Sarah realized, growing stronger with every passing moment. And Duke somehow seemed to be its guardian. "Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to present evidence regarding the paternity of Annie Mitchell and the defendant's financial obligations," Linda Chen announced, approaching the bench with a manila folder thick with documentation. Judge Wells nodded. "Proceed, Counselor." Chen's first exhibit was Annie's birth certificate, a document that had haunted Sarah for 4 years. The official paper, with its embossed seal and formal typeface, listed Marcus Webb as the father, with a certainty that felt like a mockery of the truth. "As you can see, Your Honor," Chen explained, "Mr. Webb is clearly listed as Annie's biological father on her birth certificate, filed with the state of California on March 15th, 4 years ago." Duke's reaction to the presentation of this document was immediate and visceral. He rose from his sitting position, his body rigid with attention, his nostrils flaring as if he could smell the deception embedded in the official paperwork. Maria felt his tension through the leash and placed a calming hand on his shoulder, but Duke barely acknowledged her touch. Marcus leaned back in his chair with renewed confidence. "There it is, black and white," he murmured to his lawyer. "Case closed." But Annie, with the innocent logic of a 4-year-old, was studying the birth certificate with confused interest. "What's that paper about, Mummy?" It's just grown-up paperwork, sweetheart," Sarah managed, her voice strained. "But why does it have that man's name on it? I don't like him very much. He smells wrong." The courtroom fell silent at Annie's blunt assessment. Even Judge Wells seemed taken aback by the child's directness, while Marcus's face flushed with indignation. Chen continued her presentation with financial records that painted a damning picture of Marcus's minimal involvement in Annie's life. Bank statements showed sporadic child support payments, sometimes $200, sometimes $150, often nothing at all, for months at a time. These records show that over the past 4 years, Mr. Webb has paid a total of $6,847 in child support, Chen explained, for a 4-year period. This averages to approximately $143 per month, hardly adequate support for a growing child's needs. Stone objected. "Your Honor, my client has been working entry-level positions. He's paid what he could afford." "Yet Mr. Webb found money for a new motorcycle last year," Chen countered, producing photographs from Marcus's social media accounts, showing him with an expensive Harley-Davidson, and multiple vacation trips to Las Vegas, as evidenced by these photos. Serene courtroom that several jury members, if this had been a jury trial, would have turned to stare. "The therapy dog seems to have strong opinions about financial responsibility," Judge Wells observed dryly, though her eyes showed genuine curiosity about Duke's behavior. Next came testimony from Sarah's neighbors, painting a picture of Marcus's sporadic presence in Annie's life. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door took the witness stand first. "In 4 years I've seen Mr. Webb at Sarah's apartment maybe 8 or 10 times, she testified, "and usually not for very long. Annie would get excited when he showed up, thinking maybe this time he'd actually want to spend time with her. But he always seemed like he was just checking a box, going through the motions." Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony was followed by that of Tom Bradley, who lived across the hall and had often heard Annie asking her mother why her daddy didn't come around more often. "That little girl has asked her mother 100 times why her father doesn't want to play with her," Bradley testified, his voice heavy with sympathy. "It breaks your heart. She's such a sweet kid, always trying to make friends with everyone in the building, always helping carry groceries for us older folks. She deserves better than a father who treats her like an obligation." During this testimony, Annie had grown increasingly restless. She kept glancing toward Duke, who remained focused on the proceedings, but seemed to radiate a protective energy whenever Annie's name was mentioned or her well-being was discussed. "Mommy," Annie whispered, tugging on Sarah's sleeve, "can I go say hi to the doggy now? He looks lonely." "Not now, baby," Sarah replied, but her attention was divided between controlling Annie and watching Duke's increasingly agitated behavior. Every mention of Marcus's neglect seemed to make Duke more tense, more protective. Finally, it was Sarah's turn to take the witness stand. As she walked past Duke toward the front of the courtroom, the dog's entire demeanor changed. His protective stance intensified. But there was something else in his brown eyes, something that looked almost like recognition mixed with concern. Sarah settled into the witness chair, acutely aware of Duke's unwavering gaze. Under Linda Chen's gentle questioning, she began recounting her relationship with Marcus, carefully constructing a narrative that supported their 4-year-old lie, while omitting any mention of Jake Morrison. "Mr. Webb and I dated for several months in 2019, Sarah testified, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "When I became pregnant, he initially wasn't ready for the responsibility, but he eventually accepted that Annie was his daughter." Duke's reaction to Sarah's testimony was unlike anything Maria had ever witnessed from him. The dog began pacing within the confines of his designated area, his body language screaming distress. It wasn't the protective aggression he shown toward Marcus. This was different, deeper, as if he could sense the profound conflict between Sarah's words and her true emotions. "Easy, Duke," Maria whispered, but she was growing seriously concerned. Duke's behavior was so far outside his normal parameters that she began considering whether she should request his removal from the courtroom. Judge Wells noticed Duke's agitation as well. "Officer Santos, I think we may need to—" But her words were interrupted by Annie's sudden movement. The 4-year-old had finally reached the limit of her patience and understanding. Without warning, she slipped out of her seat and began walking purposefully toward Duke, her worn teddy bear clutched in one small hand. "Annie, come back here," Sarah called from the witness stand, but Annie was already halfway across the courtroom. Bailiff Tom Morrison, the irony of his surname would become clear later, moved to gently redirect Annie back to her seat. But something in her determined little face made him hesitate. "She's just a child, wanting to pet a dog," he murmured to Judge Wells. "And Duke's never shown any aggression toward kids." Maybe, but Judge Wells was watching the scene unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing something unprecedented. Annie approached Duke with the fearless confidence that only children possess, while Duke's entire demeanor transformed from protective alertness to gentle welcome. "I think," Judge Wells said slowly, "we should allow this interaction to continue. Something very unusual is happening here, and I have a feeling it's important." Chen paused in her questioning of Sarah, while Stone half rose from his chair in objection, but everyone in the courtroom seemed mesmerized by the sight of the small blonde child approaching the magnificent German shepherd with complete trust. Maria loosened her grip on Duke's leash, trusting her partner's judgment even as she remained ready to intervene if necessary. But her concerns proved groundless. Duke's response to Annie's approach was the gentlest thing she'd ever witnessed from him. Annie stopped directly in front of Duke, tilting her head up to meet his intelligent brown eyes. "Hi, pretty doggy," she said softly. "You look sad. Are you sad?" Duke's tail, which had been motionless throughout the entire proceeding, gave a single soft wag. The court clerk, Mrs. Henderson, entered the courtroom carrying a sealed manila envelope that seemed to draw every eye in the room like a magnet. The envelope was unremarkable in appearance, standard legal size, official court seal, the kind of mundane governmental paperwork that typically held no drama at all. But everyone present understood that within that simple package lay the power to definitively resolve Annie's paternity and forever alter the trajectory of her young life. "Your Honor," Mrs. Henderson announced, her voice carrying the weight of bureaucratic finality, "I have the sealed DNA test results as requested by the court." The tension in courtroom 3B became almost palpable. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Marcus straightened in his chair, confidence and nervousness warring across his features as he contemplated what those results might mean for his future financial obligations. Even the court reporter paused in her steady typing, her fingers hovering over the keys as if the machine itself was holding its breath. But none of the adults noticed that Annie had used the moment of distraction to slip completely away from her assigned seat. With the single-minded determination that only a 4-year-old on a mission could possess, Annie walked directly to Duke, her small, bare feet silent on the polished courtroom floor. She moved with Jake Morrison's fearless confidence. Though she had no memory of the father whose courage she'd inherited, Duke saw her coming and went completely still. Every muscle in his powerful body focused on this tiny person who carried sense and genetic markers that sang to his deepest memories. As Annie approached, Duke carefully lowered himself until he was lying down, making himself less intimidating while still maintaining his alert watchfulness of the rest of the courtroom. "Hi," Annie whispered, settling herself cross-legged on the floor directly in front of Duke's massive head. "My name is Annie. What's your name?" Maria, despite her professional concerns about Duke's unusual behavior, found herself smiling at the child's innocent directness. "His name is Duke, sweetheart, and you're right. He does look sad sometimes." Annie reached out with the careful movements of a child who had been taught to be gentle with animals, her small fingers just barely touching the soft fur behind Duke's ears. Duke's response was immediate and profound. He leaned into her touch with a contentment that Maria had never witnessed from him, even during his happiest moments with Jake. "Duke," Annie repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the name. "That's a good, strong name. You're sad like my mommy is sometimes, aren't you? Do you miss someone too?" The question hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Duke's brown eyes, which had been watching Annie with gentle interest, suddenly filled with an emotion so human-like it took everyone's breath away. He pressed his muzzle gently against Annie's small chest, directly over her heart, and released a soft whine that sounded exactly like a confirmation. "Oh," Annie said, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children bring to emotional trips, like the connection forming between this child and this dog. "Your Honor," Stone objected half-heartedly, "while this is touching, perhaps we could return to the matter at hand, the DNA results." But Judge Wells held up a hand for silence. Her instincts, honed by decades of reading human behavior and family dynamics, were telling her that what was happening between Annie and Duke was somehow central to understanding this case. Duke, meanwhile, was experiencing emotions he hadn't felt since Jake's death. The scent of this child, the sound of her voice, the gentle way she touched him, everything about her resonated with memories of his beloved partner. But more than that, something deep in his canine intuition was telling him that his long search was finally over. This was why he had been restless for months. This was why he had scanned faces in courthouse corridors and pulled toward strangers during walks. This was what Jake's final whispered request had been about: finding and protecting his family. "You're a police dog, aren't you?" Annie asked, her small fingers tracing the outline of Duke's official collar. "My mommy told me that police dogs are the bravest, kindest dogs in the whole world. They protect people and keep them safe." Duke's tail began wagging, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. It was the first genuine expression of happiness anyone in the courtroom had seen from him since his arrival that morning. Sarah watched from a witness stand with growing alarm. There was something about the way Duke responded to Annie, something about the immediate and profound connection between them, that made her stomach twist with anxiety. It was as if Duke recognized Annie in a way that should have been impossible. But it is impossible, Sarah told herself. Dogs don't understand paternity or genetics. This is just coincidence. Annie has always been good with animals. Yet, even as she tried to rationalize what she was seeing, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Duke's behavior was somehow connected to the lie she'd been living for 4 years. Marcus, watching the scene unfold, felt a growing irritation that had nothing to do with legal strategy and everything to do with jealousy. Here was his daughter, the child he'd been financially responsible for, the reason he'd been obligated to pay child support and attend uncomfortable family court proceedings, showing more natural affection toward a dog she'd just met than she had ever shown toward him. "She's never that relaxed around me," Marcus muttered to his lawyer. "4 years I've been her father, and she acts like I'm a stranger." Stone glanced at his client with concern. There was something in Marcus's tone that suggested he was beginning to doubt his own position, and that was dangerous territory for their case. Maria, meanwhile, reaction to this specific child, was coalescing into a theory so improbable she hardly dared consider it. But the evidence was right in front of her. Duke's protective positioning, his gentle response to Annie, his obvious recognition of something in her that no one else could see. "Duke," she whispered, her voice too soft for anyone else to hear. "Is this what you've been looking for? Is this what Jake asked you to find?" Duke's ears twitched at the mention of Jake's name, and he looked up at Maria with eyes that seemed to confirm her impossible suspicion. Annie, oblivious to the adult complexities swirling around her, continued her innocent conversation with her new friend. "I bet you were the best police dog ever. I bet you helped lots of people and kept them safe from bad guys." She paused, tilting her head with 4-year-old curiosity. "I wish I could have met your police officer. I bet he was really nice." Duke's response to this innocent comment was profound and unmistakable. He gently nuzzled Annie's cheek, his tail wagging with renewed vigor, his entire body language radiating a contentment that spoke of a long journey finally reaching its destination. Judge Wells made a decision that would later be cited as either inspired judicial intuition or a complete abandonment of proper courtroom procedure. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice carrying quiet authority, "let's wait a moment before opening those DNA results. I want to understand what we're witnessing here." The sealed envelope sat on the court clerk's desk, its contents holding the power to destroy Sarah's 4-year-old lie. But for this moment, the most important truth in courtroom 3B was being revealed not through scientific evidence or legal documentation, but through the impossible recognition between a grieving dog and the child he had somehow always known he was meant to find. "Your Honor," Linda Chen said carefully, "while this interaction is certainly touching, I'm not sure how it relates to the paternity determination we're here to resolve." Judge Wells studied the scene before her. Annie's complete trust in Duke, Duke's obviously protective positioning, the way they seemed to communicate on a level that transcended species. "I have a feeling, Counselor, that it relates more than any of us might expect." The courtroom held its collective breath as Annie wrapped her small arms around Duke's neck in an impromptu hug. "I'm really glad I met you, Duke," she whispered. "I think we're going to be best friends." Duke's tail wagged harder, and for the first time in 3 years, the hollow ache in his chest, the Jake-shaped emptiness that had defined Duke's world, was defined by scent in ways humans could barely imagine. Every person carried a unique olfactory fingerprint, genetics, diet, emotions, and memories woven together. But Annie's scent struck him like a blow. He moved closer, where she sat cross-legged on the courtroom floor, nostrils flaring, inhaling bubble gum shampoo, playground dirt, the cotton of a worn teddy bear, and something impossibly familiar. Beneath it all were genetic markers echoing the scent of Jake Morrison, Duke's late partner. Not identical, but woven through with molecular reminders of shared DNA and inherited courage. Duke's years as a detection dog had taught him to trust his nose above all. He could find explosives under concrete, bodies hidden for months, and now he was certain. Annie was Jake's daughter. Memories surged. Jake's laugh about becoming a father, the protective hormones in his scent during those final weeks. The promise whispered to Duke, "You're going to help me teach her right from wrong, aren't you, partner?" Now, 3 years later, Duke was meeting that child. Annie, too, felt something. She'd always liked animals, but Duke was different, safe, sad, and gentle. She stroked his ears. "Everyone thinks big dogs are scary, but you're just gentle, aren't you?" Duke leaned into her touch, confirming with his heart what his nose already knew. Spectators whispered. The bailiff murmured, "That's not typical therapy dog behavior. He's protecting family." Duke angled his body between Annie and Marcus Webb, the man claiming to be her father. Annie glanced at Duke's eyes. "My real daddy would have eyes like yours, eyes that make me feel safe." Sarah, on the witness stand, felt her world shake. She'd hidden Jake's existence to secure financial stability, but seeing Annie's bond with Duke made her realize what she'd stolen: a father's love, a family's protection. Judge Wells called for a recess, but Marcus bristled at Annie's attention toward the dog. "Come here, Annie," he ordered sharply. Duke's transformation was instant. He surged up, planting himself between Annie and Marcus, muscles taut, gaze hard. A silent warning: you will not threaten her. The courtroom froze. Maria Santos, Duke's handler, trusted his instincts. Marcus protested. "I'm her father. I have rights." Annie's calm voice cut through. "He's being protective, like daddy should be." Judge Wells, balancing legal procedure with instinct, allowed Duke to stay. Marcus muttered bitterly about the dog having more right to her than he did, earning another piercing look from Duke. Annie rested her hand on his neck. "I know you're just taking care of me, just like my real daddy would." Leaning against Duke, Annie spoke softly, unaware of the tension she stirred. "Sometimes Mommy cries." Subject. Sarah's heart cracked. Her daughter sensed the truth. Duke listened, absorbing her words, positioning himself even closer. Annie whispered, "Sometimes I dream about someone nice and strong who'd read me stories and make Mommy not cry. Do you think that's silly?" Duke nuzzled her cheek tenderly. Studying her face, Duke saw Jake in her jawline, her eyes, the tilt of her head, even her courage. The court reporter whispered, "It's like he's found his long-lost family." Linda Chen, Sarah's lawyer, urged the court to acknowledge what they were seeing before turning to DNA results. Marcus's attorney dismissed it as irrelevant, but Annie, still in her own world, said, "I wish I could have met your police officer partner. I bet he was brave and kind and strong, just like you." The words pierced Duke. She was talking about Jake without knowing he was her father. Duke pressed his muzzle to her chest in a silent promise. "Oh," she said softly, "you really miss him, don't you?" Sarah realized she hadn't just hidden Jake. She'd robbed Annie of an entire family. "I'll be your friend forever," Annie promised. Duke's tail wagged for the first time in 3 years. Judge Wells ordered the DNA results opened, but acknowledged that what they'd witnessed transcended legal proof. The envelope lay ready, but the truth was already written in the bond between a loyal dog and the child of his fallen partner. Whatever the paper said, Annie and Duke belonged together.
bound by loyalty, love, and a hero's memory that no lie could erase. Court Clerk Mrs. Henderson approached Judge Wells with a sealed envelope bearing the Genetics Lab Associates' seal. It felt heavier than its size, weighted with the fate of everyone in courtroom 3B. "Your Honor," she announced, "these are the DNA results comparing Marcus Webb and Annie Mitchell." The room stilled. Annie's hand froze in Duke's fur. Duke himself went rigid, eyes fixed on the envelope. Sarah's heart pounded. 4 years of lies were about to be exposed. Marcus leaned forward, suddenly less certain. Judge Wells opened the envelope with deliberate care. "Whatever these results say," she reminded, "our priority is Annie's welfare." She read, voice clear. "Probability of paternity, 0%. Marcus Webb is excluded as Annie Mitchell's biological father." The words landed like a blow. Marcus shot up, shouting, "That's impossible. Her birth certificate, child support, 4 years." Sarah's mask slipped. Relief, guilt, and dread warred across her face. Duke instantly tightened his stance around Annie, shielding her fully now that legal confusion was gone. "What does that mean?" Annie asked softly.
Lied to me. 4 years of my life." Duke read the aggression and stepped forward, protective posture sharpening. Annie pressed against him, comforted. Marcus's anger turned venomous. "I want every penny back. She's not even my kid." He jabbed a finger toward Annie. Duke's growl was low but unmistakable, a trained warning. Annie's tears spilled as Marcus's rejection cut deep. Bailiff Morrison stepped in, but Marcus raged on about wasted years. Sarah pleaded, "Don't take this out on Annie." The gavel cracked again. Judge Wells warned him about traumatizing a child, but Marcus scoffed. His attorney urged him to stop, yet his resentment had already bared itself to the court. Through sobs, Annie asked Sarah, "Why doesn't he want to be my daddy, if he's supposed to be?" Duke nuzzled her cheek, still guarding her. Then Annie's voice steadied. "It's okay he doesn't want to be my daddy. I know who my real daddy is." Sarah paled. Annie hugged Duke fiercely. "My real daddy was a hero, like you." Gasps rippled. Duke's tail wagged slowly, as if her words confirmed what he'd known from first scent. Sarah tried to intervene, but Annie pressed on. "Mommy has pictures of him in police clothes. He has kind eyes like Duke. Mommy cries when she looks at them." Maria Santos's breath caught. Duke's behavior made sudden sense. Annie added, "He had a dog partner like you. Mommy said they're the bravest dogs in the world." Judge Wells asked gently, "What's your daddy's name?" Sarah reached for her, but Duke stepped between them. "Jake," Annie said simply. "Jake Morrison. Mommy says he went to heaven before I was born, but he was the best policeman ever and loved us very much." The name exploded through the room. Maria gasped. Mrs. Patterson froze at her stenograph. Duke rose, pride and protectiveness radiating beside Annie. Judge Wells confirmed. "Officer Jake Morrison, killed in the line of duty?" "You knew my daddy?" Annie asked eagerly. Maria stood, voice shaking. "Your Honor, Jake Morrison was Duke's partner for 3 years until Jake was killed in a drug bust. Duke has been his dog all this time." Annie's eyes widened. "You were my daddy's partner?" Duke licked her hand, tail wagging in pure joy. "You've been looking for me, haven't you?" Sarah whispered, "I'm sorry. Jake was Annie's father. I lied because I was scared and alone." Judge Wells took in the scene, Annie clutching Duke, Sarah crying, Marcus stunned, Maria watching her partner's happiest moment in years. "It seems we have far more to discuss than a paternity case." Annie looked at Duke. "I always knew the mean man wasn't my daddy. He didn't smell right, but you look at me like my real daddy would, like I'm worth protecting." Duke pressed closer, his message unmistakable. He had found Jake Morrison's daughter. Marcus's claim, but Annie's truth revealed something greater. She was the daughter of a hero, now united with the loyal partner who had been searching for her all along. The weight of 4 years of deception finally broke Sarah Mitchell. She collapsed in the witness chair, covering her face as sobs tore from her chest. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, the words carrying through the silent courtroom. "I can't keep lying to my daughter about who her father was. I can't pretend Jake Morrison didn't exist." Judge Wells leaned forward, her tone soft. "Mrs. Mitchell, take your time, but I think we need the whole truth." Tears streaked Sarah's cheeks, smearing her careful makeup. Jake Morrison was Annie's father, Officer Jake Morrison of the Metropolitan Police. He was the love of my life, and the father Annie should have grown up knowing. The room stilled. Annie's small hand froze in Duke's fur. The German shepherd sat unmoving, eyes locked on Sarah, as if he understood every word. "We met at a coffee shop near the university," Sarah continued, a wistful smile breaking through her grief. "I was a grad student. He came in every morning, black coffee, blueberry muffin, and always left a $5 tip for a $2 drink." "That sounds like a nice daddy," Annie murmured. "He was," Sarah said, looking at her daughter with love and regret. "Brave, kind. He became a police officer to keep families like ours safe. We planned to marry after Annie was born. He wanted her to be part of the proposal." Her voice trembled. "But then came the knock at 2:17 a.m. 2 officers on my doorstep, killed in the line of duty. My world ended. Pregnant and alone, Sarah faced a wall of paperwork and grief. That's when Marcus Webb, an old boyfriend, offered support. "I told him he was Annie's father," she admitted. "I thought I was securing her future." Marcus leapt to his feet. "So you admit you defrauded me. I want her prosecuted." Judge Wells silenced him with a raised hand. Sarah pressed on. Every day the lie grew heavier. Annie deserved to know her father was a hero, not a stranger. Annie reached over, patting her mother's hand. "It's okay, Mommy. Now I know the truth, and I have Duke, who knew my real daddy." The judge's gaze softened. "I understand your desperation, but your actions have serious consequences." "I know," Sarah said, "but seeing Annie with Duke today, I can't keep lying. She deserves the truth." Mrs. Henderson, the court clerk, stepped forward with a folder. "Your Honor, I researched Officer Morrison's record." Judge Wells scanned the pages, her expression tightening with respect. "His record is partner." Her eyes flicked to Duke. He was wounded that night but refused to leave Jake's side. Maria Santos, Duke's current handler, stood. They were inseparable. When Jake died, Duke grieved so deeply we thought we'd lose him. Lately he's been searching. Now I understand why. Mrs. Henderson revealed the final blow. Jake left unclaimed benefits, over $127,000, plus a scholarship fund. Annie was entitled to it all. Sarah gasped, realizing the security she'd sought in lies had been there all along. Mrs. Henderson pulled out a photograph, Jake laughing as Duke leapt for a frisbee. The resemblance to Annie was unmistakable. Annie stared at it. "He looks like he'd give good hugs." Duke pressed against her side, tail wagging softly. Maria's voice cracked. "That's exactly how he looked at Jake." It was more than a paternity dispute. It was a family finding each other again through loyalty that survived death. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, an expert in canine scent recognition, approached. Dogs can detect genetic relationships. Duke spent years with Jake. When he met Annie, he recognized her hereditary scent immediately. Judge Wells frowned slightly. So this isn't coincidence? Not at all, Dr. Hernandez said. It's imprinting. Jake and Duke's bond was unbreakable. When Jake talked about his family, Duke would have linked those emotions to Sarah's pregnancy. Annie carries Jake's scent markers. Duke knew instantly who she was. Maria nodded. That explains his searching. Dr. Hernandez showed photos of Jake and Duke on duty at community events, relaxing together. The final image, taken weeks before Jake's death, showed Jake kneeling beside Duke, both looking into the camera with absolute trust. "Look at Annie's face," Dr. Hernandez said quietly. The resemblance was uncanny. Duke recognized it, the way she moves, the sound of her voice. To him, she is Jake's family. Annie's voice was soft but sure. "You knew my daddy. You've been looking for me because he asked you to take care of me." Duke nuzzled her cheek. The courtroom seemed to exhale. Judge Wells looked at them, child and dog, bound by the love of a man gone too soon. "We've witnessed something remarkable today, a family reunited by loyalty that defies explanation." But in truth, everyone in the room knew the explanation. It was love, pure, unwavering, her voice sharp. "Mr. Webb, you are hereby notified this office intends to charge you with conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents, and obtaining money under false pretenses, serious felonies." Color drained from Marcus's face. "I didn't know. Sarah told me I was the father. I believed it." Walsh opened a folder. "Then explain these text messages from 3 years ago." She read aloud. "Sarah Mitchell, are you sure you want to keep doing this? I feel terrible about lying." Marcus Webb, "It's not lying if we both benefit. You get child support, I get to look responsible. Stick to the story." A ripple of shock swept through the courtroom. Marcus stammered, "That's not—" Walsh cut in, reading another. "Marcus Webb, as long as nobody asks for DNA tests, we're fine. The kid gets support, you get help, and I look like I stepped up. Win-win." "Does this sound," Walsh asked coldly, "like a man who believed he was Annie's biological father?" Marcus's lawyer, Richard Stone, knew the fight was over. "Your Honor, I must withdraw as counsel. This is now a criminal matter beyond my scope." "You are released," Judge Wells said. "Mr. Webb, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." But Marcus ignored her. "So what if I knew? I still paid. I still supported that kid." "Are you admitting," Walsh asked evenly, "to knowingly participating in a fraudulent paternity claim?" "I'm admitting I helped a woman in need. If that's illegal, the system's broken." The spectators' disgust was palpable. Bailiff Morrison stepped forward with cuffs. "Marcus Webb," Walsh said, "you're under arrest." "This is insane," Marcus shouted as he was led away. But no one looked convinced. When the doors shut behind him, Judge Wells addressed the room. "Let this be a warning. Fraudulent paternity claims, especially those affecting children, will be prosecuted." With Marcus gone, Walsh turned to Sarah Mitchell. "Mrs. Mitchell, your cooperation will be considered. We're prepared to offer you a plea agreement in exchange for your testimony." Sarah nodded. She didn't deserve the chance, but Annie did. Within hours, court staff had compiled a complete picture of Jake Morrison's legacy for his daughter. Mrs. Henderson approached the bench with a thick folder. Officer Morrison had a life insurance policy, $75,000 to surviving spouse and children, including Annie. Pension and death benefits total another $31,000. Sarah's breath caught. Over $100,000? There's more, Henderson continued. A memorial fund, $47,000 raised by fellow officers, plus a police union scholarship covering full tuition, room, board, and supplies at any state university. Sarah's knees felt weak. 4 years of scraping by while Annie's inheritance had sat untouched. Mistakes. But your deception denied your daughter her father's provisions. Annie tugged her sleeve. It's okay, Mommy. I know you were just scared. Her small forgiveness made more than one person in the gallery wipe away tears. Walsh addressed the bench. We recommend immediate transfer of all funds into a court-supervised trust. So ordered, Wells said. Annie Morrison will have her education and future secured. Maria Santos of the police department stepped forward. Your Honor, we've waited 4 years to welcome Annie. We'd like her to visit the station, see her father's locker, meet his colleagues. Officer Rodriguez added, We also request she be named an honorary member of our force, and we wish to present her with her father's medals. Annie's eyes lit up. My daddy had medals? Like a real hero? Your daddy was a real hero, Santos said softly. Sarah's tears flowed freely. She belongs with the people who knew and loved her father. And Duke gets to come too, right? Annie asked. Duke will always be where you need him, Judge Wells assured her. But Annie's transformation needed legal recognition. Mrs. Henderson, the judge said, prepare an emergency order for a corrected birth certificate naming Jake Morrison as father. Expedite it. Annie's face shone. So my last name can be Morrison? You have every right, Wells confirmed. I like it, Annie said proudly. It makes me feel like I belong to my daddy. Sarah, choked with emotion, added, I want her to have everything, his name, benefits, memory, and place in the police family. Finally, Wells turned to Duke. Officer Santos, about his status. Your Honor, Santos said, resting a hand on Duke's head. He's found his purpose again. I request he be designated Annie's permanent companion. Annie hugged Duke tightly. My forever friend? Really and truly, Wells smiled. The judge looked over the scene. Annie beaming beside Duke, Sarah grateful, officers ready to embrace Jake's daughter, and Duke sitting like a soldier whose mission was complete. Let the record show, Wells declared, that Annie Morrison is the legal daughter of Officer Jake Morrison, entitled to all benefits, honors, and recognition. Duke is officially her companion animal. The gavel fell, not as an end, but as a beginning. Annie, Wells asked gently, would you like to say anything? The 4-year-old stood, hand on Duke's head. Thank you to Duke for find and protect his daughter. Now Annie stood taller, Duke stood watch, and a family once broken by lies was whole again, bound by love, loyalty, and the truth that had finally come home. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot as Sarah pulled into the Metropolitan Police Department. In the passenger seat, Annie's face was pressed to the glass, eyes wide with wonder. Is this really where my daddy worked? She asked for the 3rd time. Yes, sweetheart. Sarah said, voice thick. He came here every day to help keep people safe. In the back, Duke sat in his harness, ears pricked, nose working. Maria Santos recognized the shift. He knew this place. This was where he'd spent years at Jake Morrison's side. "Look, Duke remembers," Annie grinned. Inside, the usual bustle slowed. Officers paused mid-task, their eyes soft with recognition. Word had spread. Jake's daughter had been found, and his old partner had known her on sight. Sergeant Williams, Jake's supervisor, stepped forward, eyes damp. "Annie Morrison, I've waited 4 years to meet you." "Did you know my daddy was brave?" she asked. "The bravest," Williams said. "He talked about you all the time." The crowd parted as Officer Rodriguez asked, "Want to see your daddy's locker? We've kept it just how he left it." They walked the familiar halls, familiar to Duke, who wagged as though retracing old patrols. In the locker room, Williams opened the metal door with reverence. Inside, a photo of Sarah, pregnant and glowing. "He looked at that picture every day," Williams said. Annie stared. "He really wanted to meet me." "More than anything," Officer Martinez said. "He dreamed of teaching you so many things." Duke inhaled deeply, catching scents that pulled him back in time, and let out a soft whine. Annie stroked his head. "I know you miss him too." In the main corridor, they stopped at the memorial wall. Jake's portrait smiled out from among the fallen, flanked by commendations and candid shots from community events. "He saved 3 kids from a house fire here," Officer Chen said. Annie studied each image. "He looks like someone who gave good hugs." "The best," Williams replied. Finally, Williams called the day shift together. In front of them all, he placed Jake's Medal of Valor and Distinguished Service Cross into Annie's hands. "These represent your daddy's courage," he told her. "My daddy was a real hero, wasn't he?" "The realest," Rodriguez said. Duke sat tall, as if he understood. The legacy was finally where it belonged. The weeks after court were a new beginning. For 4 years, Sarah had tiptoed around Jake's absence. Now the truth. For 3 months before he asked me out. Practiced in the mirror for a week. Was he nervous? Annie giggled. Terrified, Sarah said, laughing. Every night, new stories. Jake's terrible cooking, how he talked to Duke like a person, the baby dreams he never got to see through. "Do you think he would have liked me?" Annie asked once. "Liked you," Sarah said fiercely. "He would have loved you so much it would have taken his breath away." They began visiting Jake's grave together, Duke always beside them. On their first trip, Annie traced the engraved letters. "Hi, Daddy, I'm sorry it took so long. Mommy was scared, but it's okay now. Duke found me." Duke sat between her and the headstone, bridging the gap between the living and the gone. When Sarah apologized for her years of deception, Annie's answer was simple. "You were just trying to take care of me. Daddy would understand. He'd want you to forgive yourself." Sarah began a memory book, photos, stories, mementos. Officers contributed snapshots and commendations. Sarah added ultrasound images Jake had carried in his wallet. "This is so you'll always know who your daddy was," Sarah told her. Duke's reunion with Annie had transformed him. The distant, dutiful therapy dog was gone, replaced by a partner with renewed energy and purpose. "He's like a different dog," Maria told Williams. "Focused, happy, like when he was with Jake." The department approved a unique arrangement. Duke would be Annie's official companion and protector. "Duke's earned the right to choose his mission," Chief Martinez said. "And if that's protecting Jake's daughter, that's exactly what he'll do." Training refined his instincts for civilian life. Annie proved a natural partner, reading Duke's body language as if she'd known him forever. Morning walks became little patrols. Afternoons meant cartwheels and bike rides with Duke nearby, ready to comfort or celebrate. At preschool drop-offs, at doctor visits, during bad dreams, Duke was there. Annie thrived under his constant presence, her confidence growing in the security he provided. "Duke understands about missing someone," she told Sarah. "He misses Daddy too, so he knows how I feel." For Duke, protecting Annie fulfilled Jake's final request. For Annie, Duke was proof she would never face the world alone. Together they attended police events, Annie charming rooms full of officers, Duke watchful but calm. Officers saw Jake in her, his fearlessness, his warmth, and in Duke's steady gaze, the loyalty that had outlived his partner. Maria summed it up best. "He's not replacing Jake, he's honoring him, by protecting what Jake loved most." Duke had found his family again. Annie had found her protector. And together, they carried Jake Morrison's legacy forward, not as a shadow of loss, but as a living bond of love, loyalty. Police work began with short visits to the station, gradually becoming lessons about not just what her father did, but why he dedicated his life to protecting others. "Police officers are like superheroes," Officer Rodriguez told her, kneeling beside a patrol car like the one Jake and Duke once used. "They have training, courage, and partners like Duke." Annie's eyes lit up as she explored the car's radio, computer, and flashing lights. But her greatest fascination was Duke. "Duke was Daddy's partner?" she asked. "More than that," Sergeant Williams said. "They were a team. Together, they were unstoppable." From that day, Duke became her protector and teacher, showing her how to track scents, detect hidden objects, and stay calm under pressure. "Can you teach me to be brave like you and Daddy?" she asked once, hands on his head. Duke responded with a nuzzle and a stance that blended strength with gentleness. Sarah recorded their sessions, amazed as Annie absorbed Jake's values: courage, compassion, service. "I want to help people like Daddy did," Annie declared. The community embraced her, shop owners sharing memories of Jake and offering Duke treats, neighbors treating her like family. Officer Martinez began bringing her to community events, where her ease with Duke made her a natural ambassador. "She has Jake's gift for connecting with people," Officer Chen noted. Annie introduced herself proudly as Annie Morrison, daughter of Officer Jake Morrison. Soon she was invited to appear at the annual Police Memorial Day ceremony. Duke thrived in his new mission. Once listless after Jake's death, he now radiated purpose, guarding Annie with unwavering focus. "It's like she brought him back to life," Officer Rodriguez said. Maria agreed. Protecting Jake's daughter gave him back everything that made him special. Sarah's own healing paralleled Duke's. Years of guilt over hiding Jake's identity from Annie began to lift. Community compassion replaced fear of judgment. "You did the best you could at the time," Mrs. Patterson reminded her. Living truthfully deepened her bond with Annie, improved her work, and restored her peace. Annie's presence inspired others. Children asked about police dogs. Teachers used her story as lessons in loyalty and courage. Duke extended his care to other children, sensing and comforting those in distress, like the boy at the hospital whose father was deployed. Their story spread locally and nationally. Other families of fallen officers reached out, and Duke's transformation inspired more reunions between canines and their handlers' families. "They've shown bonds can survive even death," Chief Martinez said. Sarah began volunteering with groups supporting families of fallen officers, determined to help others avoid her mistakes. Hard questions from Annie about a constant. They created new traditions, weekly visits to Jake's grave, Annie bringing flowers and updates about her life, Duke standing guard. At night, Duke slept by her bed, a silent protector. At the Police Memorial Day ceremony, Annie read her speech clearly. "I'm proud to be his daughter, and I want to help people like he did." The crowd rose in ovation. She and Duke also began helping distressed children in court, combining her empathy with his calming presence. At preschool, Annie became the child others turned to when upset. Sarah, free from the weight of deception, advanced in her career. The community honored them in countless ways, displaying photos of Jake, Annie, and Duke as symbols of resilience. Planning for Annie's education became a hopeful act. When told Jake's benefits would fund her dreams, she asked, "Can I use some to help other kids whose daddies can't be with them?" Their life now rested on truth, love, and shared purpose. The traditions they built honored Jake's memory while embracing the future with confidence. Their story of love over loss, truth over deception, and bonds beyond death would carry Jake Morrison's legacy forward through Annie's life and all she chose to create. The morning sun streamed into Annie Morrison's kindergarten classroom as she stood at the front, holding a poster board filled with photographs from her father's police career. At just 5, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a child who finally knew who she was. "My name is Annie Morrison," she began clearly, "and my daddy was Officer Jake Morrison, the bravest police officer in the whole city." Her classmates listened closely as she pointed to photos: Jake in dress uniform, Jake and Duke at a safety demo, Jake's official portrait with his kind eyes and steady smile. "My daddy died a hero before I was born," she continued matter-of-factly. "But his best friend Duke found me in a courtroom, and now he takes care of me just like Daddy asked him to." Right on cue, Duke appeared in the doorway, drawing gasps from the children. Mrs. Rodriguez, the teacher, had arranged for him to attend. Annie rested her hand on his head. "He's a police dog and my best friend. He knew my daddy for 3 years, and now he's teaching me everything Daddy would have wanted me to know." Their story had traveled far, newspapers, TV, social media, about the miracle dog who recognized his late partner's daughter. Annie told her classmates, "Duke can smell bad guys, find lost people, and he always knows when someone needs a hug." She shared her father's medals, retold stories from his colleagues, and spoke about how "Remarkable," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered to Sarah. Annie's college fund, Jake's insurance benefits, memorial donations, and proceeds from appearances was growing steadily. "Daddy wanted me to go to any college I choose," she told the reporter, "so I can help people like he did." The police department had embraced her as family, creating a mentorship program. She had her own junior badge, a child-sized vest, and free run of the station. "She's our good luck charm," Chief Martinez said. "Crime rates drop when Annie's around." Duke thrived too. His energy at 8 amazed vets. "It's like finding Annie turned back the clock," Dr. Hernandez said. Community support came in small, steady ways. Saved treats, bookstore displays, newspaper updates. Sarah was working on a children's book about their story. "Families can be made in unexpected ways," she told publishers. Annie added, "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are." Her presentation ended in applause, classmates crowding around Duke. His tail wagged, content in fulfilling his partner's last wish. A year after their reunion, they were no longer living in loss. They were a family, inspiring all who heard their story. That evening, the second annual Jake Morrison Memorial Fund dinner filled the downtown convention center with more than 300 guests. Officers, community leaders,
supporters, raising money for families of fallen officers. Annie sat at the head table between Sarah and Chief Martinez, wearing a navy dress and a pin of Jake's badge number. At 5, she had become the living emblem of the fund's mission. Proof of love and community after tragedy. Before we begin, Chief Martinez said at the podium, I want to acknowledge someone very special. Annie Morrison, daughter of Officer Jake Morrison, has become our inspiration and our reminder of why this work matters. Warm applause followed as Annie stood and waved. Duke, in his formal police vest, sat alert beside her, tail gently wagging. Annie's role had grown naturally, presenting scholarships, joining fundraising walks, starting the annual police canine competition. I want to help other kids whose daddies and mommies can't be with them, she told Sarah. Daddy would want me to share the love I have. Duke's ambassador duties had also expanded beyond their city. He visited schools, community events, and training facilities, showing the bond between officers and canines, and serving as a living example of loyalty, dedication, and love. Duke shows people what police dogs can do, Annie would explain to audiences, her small hand resting proudly on Duke's head. But more than that, he shows how much police officers and their partners love each other and love the people they protect. The scholarship fund, established in Jake's name, had already provided full college tuition for Annie, serving as the ceremonial presenter of the award letters. Her understanding of her father's sacrifice had deepened considerably over the past year as she met other children who had lost parents in the line of duty and began to comprehend the broader community of families affected by such losses. My daddy died protecting people, Annie had said during her speech at the previous year's memorial service, her young voice carrying clearly through the silent crowd. But his death wasn't the end of his helping people. It was the beginning of a different kind of helping. Through this fund, through Duke, through all of us remembering him, my daddy keeps protecting families even though he's in heaven. The sophistication of Annie's understanding never failed to amaze the adults in her life. Sarah had worried that exposure to so many stories of loss and grief might be overwhelming for a young child, but Annie seemed to process these experiences in ways that strengthened rather than traumatized her. She has Jake's gift for finding hope in difficult circumstances, Officer Rodriguez observed after watching Annie comfort a 6-year-old whose father had been killed in a car accident while responding to an emergency call. She doesn't minimize other people's pain, but she shows them that love continues even after death. Duke's mentoring of new police dogs and their handlers had become an official part of the department's training program. Young canine teams would spend time with Duke and Annie, learning not just tactical skills, but understanding the emotional bonds that made the human-dog partnership so effective. Duke teaches our new dogs how to read human emotions, explained Sergeant Kim, who oversaw the canine training program. But more importantly, he shows our human officers what true partnership looks like. Watching Duke with Annie demonstrates the level of dedication and protective instinct that makes canine units so special. The memorial garden planted at the courthouse, designed with Annie's input and maintained by volunteers from throughout the community, had become a place of reflection and healing for anyone dealing with loss or seeking inspiration. Annie had chosen flowers that bloomed throughout the year, ensuring that the garden remained beautiful and meaningful, regardless of the season. I wanted flowers that would make people smile, even when they're sad, Annie had explained to the landscape designer. Daddy would want people to find hope here, not just sadness. A bronze plaque in the garden featured Jake's official police portrait, alongside an inscription that Annie had helped compose. Officer Jake Morrison gave his life protecting others.
His love lives on through his daughter Annie and his partner Duke, reminding us that the bonds of family and service transcend even death. Sarah's volunteer work with families of fallen officers had become one of her most meaningful activities,
into something that helped others navigate similar tragedies.
She provided practical guidance on insurance claims and benefit procedures, but more importantly, she offered hope to widows and children who felt overwhelmed by their circumstances. Sarah shows us that it's possible to build a meaningful life even after devastating loss, said Margaret Chen, whose husband had been killed in a gang shooting. She and Annie prove that love and family can survive anything if you're willing to fight for truth and connection. The ripple effects of Jake's Memorial Fund extended far beyond financial assistance. The organization had facilitated the adoption of retired police dogs by families of fallen officers, created support groups for police children, and established emergency assistance programs for officers injured in the line of duty. Jake would be amazed by what's grown from his sacrifice, Chief Martinez reflected during his remarks at the benefit dinner. He died protecting one family, but his legacy now protects hundreds of families across the region. Annie's closing remarks at the benefit dinner captured the essence of her father's continuing impact. My daddy can't be here with us tonight, but everywhere I look, I see the ways he's still helping people. Every scholarship, every family that gets help, every police dog that finds a new home. That's my daddy's love, still working in the world. The standing ovation that followed her words wasn't just appreciation for her speaking ability. It was recognition that Jake Morrison's greatest legacy walked among them in the form of his courageous, compassionate daughter and his loyal partner who had never stopped serving and protecting. As the evening concluded with the announcement that the fund had raised over $200,000 for police families, Annie and Duke stood together acknowledging the applause, representing not just Jake Morrison's memory, but the continuing power of love, loyalty, and service to create positive change in the world. The Memorial Fund had become more than a charity. It was a living testament to the truth that heroism inspires heroism, that sacrifice can multiply into blessing, and that one officer's dedication to protecting others could grow into a movement that supported and strengthened entire communities. The special ceremony in courtroom 3B brought together everyone who had played a role in the miraculous reunion that had transformed 3 lives and inspired countless others. Judge Patricia Wells had requested this formal recognition not only to honor the extraordinary bond between Annie and Duke, but to officially document their story for posterity and to celebrate the triumph of truth and love over deception and despair. The courtroom, which had witnessed their first meeting exactly 18 months earlier, was filled with police officers, court staff, community members, and media representatives who had gathered to witness this formal acknowledgement of what everyone
Present understood to be something far beyond the typical human-animal relationship. "We are gathered here today," Judge Wells began, her voice carrying the weight of emotion and authority that had made her beloved throughout the legal community, "to officially recognize a bond that defies conventional understanding and challenges our assumptions about the nature of family, loyalty, and love." Annie sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and holding Duke's ceremonial leash, though everyone knew that their connection transcended any physical restraint. Duke, now wearing a special collar that designated him as Annie's official companion animal, sat with the dignity of a professional who understood the significance of the occasion, while maintaining his alert attention to Annie's needs and safety. 18 months ago, Judge Wells continued, a little girl walked into this courtroom, believing one story about her identity, and a grieving dog entered with his handler, carrying the weight of loss and an unfulfilled promise. What we witnessed that day
was nothing short of miraculous, the recognition between two souls who belonged together, separated by deception, but united by bonds that transcended even death. The judge's words brought tears to many eyes as the assembled crowd remembered that extraordinary day when Duke had immediately recognized Annie as Jake Morrison's daughter and taken up his protective position beside her. Today, we formally recognize what our hearts understood from that first moment, that Annie Morrison and Duke are family in the truest sense of the word. Their bond represents the finest qualities of both human nature and canine loyalty, showing us that love knows no boundaries and that promises made in love can be fulfilled, even across the seemingly insurmountable barrier of death. Media coverage of the ceremony was extensive, with news outlets from across the country attending to document the formal conclusion of a story that had captured hearts and imagination nationwide. The footage and photographs would join an ever-growing archive of documentation about their extraordinary relationship, ensuring that their story would inspire future generations. Letters and emails had poured in from around the world, sharing similar stories of unexpected reunions, canine loyalty, and families formed through circumstances that defied explanation. A military family in Germany had written about a retired, bomb-sniffing dog who had somehow found his way to the handler's children after their father was killed in action. A search and rescue team in Colorado had reported a dog refusing to retire until he had helped locate. With the wisdom and protective guidance she had absorbed from Duke, made her a natural spokesperson for their story and its larger implications. When asked by reporters about her plans for the future, her answer was characteristically thoughtful and generous. "I want to become a police officer like my daddy someday," Annie declared with 5-year-old certainty. "But first I want to help other kids who need to find their families or understand that they're not alone. Duke and I want to show people that love is stronger than anything that tries to separate families." Their daily adventures had become the stuff of local legend. Annie and Duke could be seen at the farmer's market, where vendors saved special treats for Duke and listened to Annie's latest stories about her father. They attended story time at the library, where Annie often volunteered to read to younger children, while Duke provided calm presence for children who might be anxious or overwhelmed. Their visits to hospitals, nursing homes, and community centers brought joy wherever they went. Duke's therapy training, combined with Annie's natural empathy, created a team that could brighten the darkest days and provide comfort to people facing their own challenges and losses. "They don't just visit, they heal," observed Dr. Martinez at the Children's Hospital where they volunteered monthly. Annie's joy and Duke's gentleness worked together to create something that's greater than the sum of their parts. Duke's contentment with his life's work was evident to everyone who knew him. The restless searching that had characterized his behavior for 3 years after Jake's death had been replaced by calm confidence and obvious joy. He had fulfilled his promise to Jake in ways that exceeded even his own canine understanding, not just finding and protecting Jake's daughter, but helping her become the kind of person who would honor her father's memory through service to others. Sarah's gratitude for the unexpected family Duke had brought them never dimmed, despite the passage of time and their adaptation to their new normal. Duke didn't just find Annie, she often told people who asked about their story. "He found the family Jake had always wanted us to be. He brought us together not just as mother and daughter, but as people who understand that our purpose is to serve and protect others." As the ceremony concluded and the attendees began to disperse, Annie made one final request. "Can we go visit Daddy and tell him about today?" The small procession to Riverside Cemetery, Annie, Sarah, Duke, and several police officers who had been part of their journey, felt less like a pilgrimage to the past than a celebration of the continuing present. At Jake's gravesite, now enhanced with a memorial bench donated by the police union, they gathered in a circle that somehow felt complete despite the absence of the man whose love had created it. Annie knelt beside Jake's headstone, the engraved letters of his name, while Duke positioned himself in his familiar protective stance. In her other hand, she held a bouquet of sunflowers, Jake's favorites, and her voice carried clearly through the quiet cemetery air. "Hi, Daddy," she began, her words addressed to the headstone, but somehow encompassing the entire circle of people who loved her. "We had a really important day today. The judge said that Duke and I are officially family now, which means you kept your promise to take care of me, even though you had to go to heaven first." She paused, looking up at Duke with a special smile reserved for their private communications. "Duke found me just like you asked him to, Daddy. He found me, and he brought me home to everyone who loved you. And now we're all taking care of each other, just like you would have wanted." Duke's gentle whine of acknowledgement seemed to speak for everyone present, a confirmation that love indeed conquers death, that loyalty transcends time, and that the bonds of family can overcome any obstacle when they're built on truth, dedication, and the unshakable belief that some promises are too important to ever be broken. The courthouse ceremony had made their relationship official, but standing together at Jake's grave, with flowers in hand and love in their hearts, they were exactly what they had always been meant to be, a complete family, united by love that conquers even death, living proof that the most important promises are kept, not just in life, but in the legacy of love that continues forever. "Duke found me just like you promised he would, Daddy," Annie whispered one final time, her words carrying on the evening breeze like a prayer, a celebration, and a promise that their story would continue to inspire and heal for generations to come. Annie and Duke's story reminds us of something we dog lovers have always known deep in our hearts. Our four-legged companions see us, understand us, and love us in ways that can literally transform our lives. German Shepherds, with their incredible intelligence and unwavering devotion, represent the very best of what's possible when humans and dogs truly connect. Duke didn't just find Jake's daughter, he found his own purpose again. And Annie didn't just gain a protector. She discovered that the love her father had shared with Duke could bridge any gap, heal any wound, and create family bonds that nothing could break. Every day, in homes across America, similar miracles of connection are happening between people and their dogs, moments of understanding, comfort, and unconditional love that remind us we're never truly alone. If you've been touched by Annie and Duke's story and feel inspired to deepen your own relationship with your German Shepherd or any beloved dog, I'd like to share something. Possess. Much like Duke showed with Annie, it's not about training commands or fixing problems. It's about truly understanding the beautiful soul who shares your home and your heart.